Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. Where in the world is Tim Mack? I think he might be in Kyiv. Tim, welcome.
Thanks so much. This is like the 2.5 hour period where we have power, so we picked a good time to chat.
Oh my. Well, that speaks volumes about where we are, doesn't it?
It does.
Let's start with where we are. Donald Trump and Marco Rubio had floated this plan, which appeared to be that it was really written by the Russians. That would, in essence, have given Russia just about everything they wanted. Zelensky made an announcement the other day. Talk to us about what that was and if this plan is going anywhere.
Well, look, the Ukrainian position has been that they're not going to give up territory they haven't lost on the battlefield, and they're not going to lose at the table of diplomacy what they haven't lost on the front lines. And that's what the Trump administration and Russia really are seemingly working together in order to try to push on Ukraine. Now we're getting into the area of analysis here, not fact and not reporting. But I've always been of the view that we might as well just skip to the inevitable Trumpian betrayal of Ukraine, which we're seeing in slow motion. We might as well skip to the end of that and save a lot of wasted time because I think I know where this is going. Some people still have optimistic flashes of how this is going to develop. But my personal view is that hey, look, we should avoid this whole so-called peace process, which is just mostly about peace at any cost for so that the Americans can say they brokered something, as opposed to a wise, considered mediation in which both sides are asked to make sacrifices in order to achieve a peace, which should be in everyone's interest.
Now, Zelensky, as you said, isn't going to accept this. So the entire peace process, which I use in air quotes, is a farce. It is going nowhere. Um, will he now be able to sustain the fight? And to what degree is the European military support sufficient to sustain it if, in fact, Donald Trump cuts off all support whatsoever?
Well, Donald Trump has essentially cut off all humanitarian military aid, direct military and humanitarian aid. And what we've seen from studies by European institutions like the Kiel Institute is that the Europeans have been able to make up the dollar amount that America has provided to Ukraine in the past. And so Europe's really stepped up to help Ukraine. That said, there's things that the Europeans don't have to give. There's this program by which European states purchase American weaponry for Ukraine. I can imagine the Trump administration, if they're not successful, may want to cut that off. There's intelligence sharing, which the United States currently cooperates with Ukraine on, that that the Trump White House may want to curtail even further. There are things that the Americans have that are uniquely useful to Ukraine that might be lost. Um, but at a top line level, the Europeans have been really stepping up to provide what can to Ukraine.
And presumably, the Trump regime could also go about undermining, not enforcing the sanctions against Russia and let money begin flowing back, at least from the US, if not from Europe, so that Russia would not be under really as much economic pressure to end the war as they are now.
I suspect that the Zelensky administration is acting not because it sees this process as a serious peace process, but is acting in a way to minimize damage that might come about from them not agreeing to all of America's pretty coercive terms and methods. Um, their worry is not that America will cut off funding. America's already cut off funding. Their worry is that America will become explicitly pro-Russian in this conflict. The war will go on, and the United States will say, forget this war. Let's just re-engage with Russia, regardless of what's happening in Ukraine. Let's make these business deals with or without the cessation of hostilities. Let's lift the sanctions anyways, and let's welcome the Russians back into the fold and enforce this on European countries who are not ready to do that without actual substantive changed actions from the Russians.
And that is the perfect segue into another horror show known as the National Security Strategy, which is a
Yeah,
document every administration puts out, which is supposed to, in broad terms, set forth our strategic objectives, our goals, and talk in some level of detail about how we aim to achieve them. This one represents a complete about face, put aside for a fact the rhetoric and kind of the childish writing and the lack of detail and the lack of explanation of how we're going to achieve these. But essentially, it reflects that we no longer consider Russia an ally. And worse, that we're much more
Europe.
concerned. Yes, that we no longer consider Russia a adversary. Freudian slip there, and that in fact our biggest concern was that European civilization might be extinguished by mass immigration. Vladimir Putin literally applauded this. He was excited. He could have written it himself. Perhaps he did. What was the reaction of the Europeans?
Um, I think there have been a lot of signals from the Trump White House. They're quite hostile towards Europe. It's one thing to kind of divine this through a speech by J.D. Vance in Munich here and an action there and an endorsement for Viktor Orban here, and then to see it on the page in a formal strategy document, a strategy that's not just hostile towards Europe, but hostile towards American allies throughout the world. um, that one in which there's this kind of seething bitterness towards Europe, um, one in which there's this it's very thinly veiled, and emphasized on thin the racism that suffuses the document.
Yes,
There's the claim that migration into Europe will make Europe not European anymore, as if Europeanness was not a sense of citizenship or civics or mindset, and it was more about skin color. Um, it's a real uh, hostile document. It's very hostile
yes.
towards the people that Americans have considered friends for so long. And I think it will be actually a pretty historical one because I think historians love documents and proclamations and strategies that they can point to as the start of something, the end of something. And what this document really shows is the end of the transatlantic alliance that has kept the world safe for the last 80 years. Uh, uh, it's very hard to look at this and see that the administration is not outright declaring its opposition to the trajectory of Europe. By the way, all of the lecturing towards Europe, criticizing its supposed issues, not a word of obligation for Russia and how it ought to change, not a word of condemnation about Russia's many crimes. Uh, and there's criticisms of European democracy, but none of Russia's clear autocracy. I mean, the hypocrisy in this document is just overwhelming. The United States says in it that uh, it will not permit other countries to interfere with its affairs. But then the document also says that it will help stir up so-called resistance in Europe with so-called patriotic parties. Now, they didn't specify the parties, but we know that the Viktor Orbans of the world um, and other far-right groups in Europe are probably reading this document with some amount of glee. It's just a, I mean, we could go on and on with this document, but it is just it's a total betrayal of American values.
And the reaction was very explicit. A number of European countries spoke out, denounced this, said this was unacceptable. To what degree do you think this is going to affect now how they interact with the administration? They've already learned that they have to look after themselves from a defense standpoint, but is this going to increase their reluctance to share intelligence, to cooperate on other matters that might be in the United States' interest?
I think there's been some reporting already that countries are increasingly reluctant to share intelligence with the United States. Um, we have to start imagining. We used to have this term about the democratic world, and we need to understand whether this European plus Canada plus Australia plus Japan sort of world, and there are other countries in there as well. I don't mean to omit anyone, but whether this democratic world minus the US needs to find some way to band together
Yes,
in order to uphold shared values. But this was an unthinkable conversation just a year ago, I think.
right.
Um,
And even for
uh,
the first Trump term, as bad as that was, we never saw
well,
something
there
this
were guardrails.
extreme.
There were guardrails in the first
Yeah,
Trump term, right? There were people who would say, okay, you can't shoot protesters. You can't pull out of NATO. You shouldn't torture people. Um, these were and by the way, each of those three incidents, I was pointing to a specific government official who has come out and said that they gave that advice to Trump to change his mind on his preferred course of action. Um, we don't see those kinds of adults in the room right now. We
right.
don't have a General Mattis who would say, Mr. President, I think you're wrong. Here's why. Um, uh, that's gone. And so we should
Yes,
presume that whereas in the first Trump term, Trump would say something outrageous and everyone would scramble to try to fix it. This time, um, Trump is going to say something outrageous, and then the people around him are going to, with unquestioningly, go out to execute on these ridiculous policies. And I guess
right.
maybe ridiculous is not the right word for it because of how dangerous and damaging these policies are likely to become. Um,
Absolutely.
but they are. Uh, I'm at a loss for words to find the right terminology to express um, uh, how wrong uh, uh, these how morally repugnant these policies and the strategy is. I'll add just one more point in that I think that the national security strategy with regards to Europe and Ukraine is a exhortation to forget, to just
Yes,
say, don't worry about the war crimes. Don't worry about the invasion of a sovereign country. Don't worry about the killings. Don't worry about the looting and the rape and the torture. We are going to try as much as we can to reintegrate Russia with no change in behavior, no accountability at all. Let's just forget about that.
right.
And everything will be fine. Of course, everything will not be fine. People who engage in bad behavior, if they're not punished for it, will be incentivized to do more bad behavior.
Exactly.
And what we're setting ourselves up for is more war in Europe.
Absolutely. And I think that's the corollary to what you just said, which is it's not only morally repugnant, but it renounces a structure in the world that prevented World War and prevented war in Europe for 70, 80 years since the end of World War II, and largely benefited the United States, allowing it to become the most dominant political, economic, military power. The flip side of the NSS is, of course, what it says about our own hemisphere. And this fits in with what we have talked about, which is this military buildup. And now what we have come to notice are really extrajudicial killings in our own hemisphere. This seems to be a restatement of something out of the 19th century or maybe the 18th century, that we are going to dominate in our region And contrary to the notion that we don't want people interfering with us, that we're going to dominate and decide leadership, decide direction, decide policy for those countries in our region. And that sounds like a formula for war and regime change, which many suspect is underlying this Caribbean military venture. What was your reaction when you read that part of the national security strategy?
Well, it's one of those situations where uh, people like you and I, Jen, who have had this long background of trying to promote democracy in various places around the world, we come to this very kind of difficult juncture, right? Because if you look at Venezuela, Maduro is just objectively a bad person,
Yes.
uh, who's an autocrat who doesn't deserve to be in power, and who's and who Venezuelans have voted out uh, of power.
Right.
Where the national security strategy and where the Trump White House land on this is to say we have the right then, therefore, to engage in whatever activities we deem necessary, extrajudicial killings, covert operations, even invasion if necessary, in order to change the government there. Um, I'm not going to shed any tears for the Venezuelan autocrat who would be removed from office. But I think if we should have learned anything over the last 25 years, it's that we need to embrace some humility with the power that Americans have in the world and our power to change things by force, even if it's for the right reasons. Um, what I look at this strategy and I see it not as a strategy of creating mutually beneficial, prospering democracies in the same hemisphere. I see it as a strategy of humiliation, domination, coercion, and bullying. I see it as extractive. I see it as what can we get for us financially, not how do we create a more secure, more prosperous, and more mutually prosperous. Not just invading Venezuela so we can take over the oil supply and that energy companies that we are tight with get good deals, but actually have a better future for the people actually involved. I don't think that's the Trump administration's priority. Um, and so I very worry. I worry very deeply that this is not a serious group of people who, when
Yes.
things go wrong, and they will go wrong in one way or another in ways that we can't foresee right now, whether they have the expertise or the patience or the understanding to take care of that crisis. And I don't see it. I think that
Yeah.
they think that violence, you press a button and you solve a problem. And what I worry is that they'll press a button, they'll create 10 new problems,
Yes.
and they won't have the knowledge or the relationships. By the way, we've burned all sorts of relationships all throughout Latin
Yes.
America with the way that we've kind of bumbled from side to side like like a drunken sailor throughout the hemisphere, making demand and shouting at various people. We've alienated a lot of people. So
Exactly.
when we need these other officials, we need their support, we won't have it.
Exactly. This also is a case of horrific historical amnesia. We went through a period of time where we tried changing regimes in our hemisphere and abroad, and often with oil as the motivation. Those turned out badly. And more recently, Donald Trump was the one who ran against regime change in this case, it was the Middle East, who deplored Republicans, who got America enmeshed in foreign wars. And suddenly it makes you kind of nostalgic for the notion that we might be non-interventionists, that we might be isolationists. This isn't isolationism. This is colonialism. This is a aggressive policy, which, when you look at it in the biggest picture, it appears that Donald Trump is saying to Putin, "You take Europe, we're going to take our own hemisphere." And that is both unsustainable, immoral, impractical. and will open up a world of hurt both in Europe and in our own hemisphere. I also want to ask as we wrap up our time, Tim, we depend upon allies for lots of things, and somehow that gets entirely obliterated. One of the ways we control immigration in our hemisphere is working with Central and South American governments. One of the ways we interdict drugs, we had great success with Colombia in shutting down narco terrorists there. We cooperate with Europe on everything from when the United States was attacked on 9/11 to trade to protection of national security secrets and information. Donald Trump seems to have no appreciation for any of that. What's the potential damage if we tell all of those allies who do all of those things for us to, in essence, get lost? And we don't care, and we're going to tell you what to do. It's our way or the highway. And in fact, you're in the way because we want to make some deals that will benefit Donald Trump financially and his autocratic allies around the world.
I think the Trump administration is going to find the United States is not the only country in the world with uh, economic opportunities. Um, One of the reasons why America has built itself up to this state has been its welcoming of immigrants, its good relationships with Europe, its strong historical ties with a lot of the Asia Pacific region, its relationship with Canada. If you go around and you stagger and threaten and bully, you're going to find that people don't want to work with you. And uh, from an economic standpoint, from a diplomatic standpoint, from an intelligence standpoint, we need partners.
Absolutely.
America can't go it alone in the world. And I fear that at this time of relative peace and prosperity for the United States, we can pull off these hijinks. But at a time of crisis when we need friends, we're going to discover we have none because we've acted so poorly towards everyone who held out their hand in friendship to us. And it's going to lead to devastating results.
Well, that is a very sober, but I fear very accurate analysis. And this year, it used to be that Republicans, remember, railed about choosing decline. Remember that phrase that it's up to us whether we choose to be supportive of our military, supportive of our values. And it certainly seems that these folks have chosen a very perilous way to decline, with all kinds of implications for war, for economic tension, and we haven't even gotten to what they've done on climate change and a whole range of other issues. But Tim, we cannot thank you enough for being with us throughout our first year at the Contrarian. You have been a unique source of information and analysis. We continually think of your safety and your well-being as you travel the world, and we so appreciate you. And we look forward to the new year and finding where in the world you are and hearing from you.
Thanks, Jen. I'm grateful for your kind words, and I'm so glad to see what you and your team at the Contrarian have been able to build, and looking forward to 2026. Not really in the world of news, maybe, but maybe in the world of us being able to get together and exchange some thoughts and have a smile from time to time where warranted.
Absolutely. Well, it is a pleasure to be in the battle for worldwide democracy with you. Have a wonderful holiday season. We will look forward to seeing you soon.